Keep watching The Politics every Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time on New York Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely finish you. Hello, welcome to New York Parrot's Foreign Policy Review. I'm Dustin Pickering, and today we're going to discuss, we're revamping and discussing again what we discussed last week, the Ukrainian crisis. We have CARLO Parcelli, my co-host, and Billy Bob and Chris Black as guests. So if you watched last week's performance and discussion, then you'll be happy to see us again today on the same matter and the same subject. So let's kick it off with CARLO. Would you like to start off with some questions?
Actually, I'm gonna let Billy Bob start it off today.
Okay, sounds great.
Well, thanks, CARLO. Chris, just a lot of appreciation again for coming on the show. You are a international law expert, and we're very glad to have your expertise here. Since last week, I've been engaging on social media, talking to people about Ukraine, and I come up against a particular viewpoint and position with regularity that I think is a little problematic, but I was wondering to get your thoughts on how you would respond to these people. So it's the folks that identify as leftist. They might identify as Marxist. They might identify as communist, but they see the world through like the eyes of Lenin when he wrote the thing on imperialism as being the highest stage of capitalism.
Right.
So they perceive that any kind of bourgeois country that is engaging in a military conflict is something that should be opposed, and that as the working class, we should not take a side. So that was kind of Lenin's approach to World War I, and it made a lot of sense in World War I. And I think it was totally accurate and spot on analysis. I have my own opinions about why that doesn't apply now, but I was hoping you could maybe just share, how you would respond to these folks that say the United States is bad, Russia is bad. As the working class, we need to stay out of it because it's not our fight, and we need to just advocate for peace. But Russia's just as evil as the U.S. So, I mean, that's very common. I'm sure you've seen that.
Right. I actually had an exchange with somebody this morning on the left here in Canada about that very issue. Anyway, thank you for having me on again. It's great to be here. The raising Lenin's essential work, Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, I think is still relevant because he quite clearly described imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism, and it is. But then to ascribe to a victim of U.S. imperialism, imperialist elements is, to me, absurd. We have to remember that Russia is part of what once was the Soviet Union, which the NATO and U.S. powers ultimately brought down through 60 years of sanctions and embargoes and ruining its economy, and the destruction in the Second World War, which they really never recovered from sufficiently to keep going. And then in the 90s, they sent in all their people and looted Russia. It was almost destroyed internally, and trillions of dollars were taken out, and the population decreased by millions. in despair and ill health and so on, poverty. And it's only when Vladimir Putin was installed in power by who we're not really clear, but obviously people who wanted to stabilize the situation and try and restore Russia's sovereignty and independence. So now you have a victim country which has been destroyed as the Soviet Union and was destroyed as Russia. The people inside it have now discovered, kicked out all those people trying to loot it, and now then faced 10 years, or 15 since 1999, so 20 years of NATO expanding east. And for what purpose? Because NATO's only purpose is to attack Russia and the Soviet Union, and expanding east, threatening to attack it again, and then placing nuclear missiles along the line from the Baltic down to Romania, and they were going to place the last missiles in Ukraine in September this year. And we know that NATO practiced nuclear attacks on Russia just in October, November this year, exercises with the Germans. And America has a first strike nuclear policy that they feel they can use nuclear weapons anytime they deem fit, like they did in Japan. So to ascribe to a victim country of NATO and American imperialism and aggression, that country, victim country, is imperialist because it stands up and resists that aggression, is absurd. And it shows the left has, a lot of the left, not all of the left, but a lot of the left has gone off the road, and they don't analyze things correctly because it seems it's only in the West. You don't have the Chinese Communist Party supports Russia, the Cuban Communist Party, the South African Communist Party, the Indian Communist Party, Cuba, China, Venezuela, the Venezuelan Communist Party all support Russia's actions. The Russian Communist Party the party of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation supports these actions. In fact, they were the ones that prompted Putin to recognize the Donbass republics. It was their motion in the Duma that prompted that. So if you look at the world situation, most of the socialist countries support Russia. And then we're left here in the West, in the NATO countries, has to explain why they've collapsed into supporting essentially NATO's logic. They, by condemning Russia as some sort of bourgeois imperialist power, when it's not, it's a country which is struggling to survive for its very existence, and then does resist. Then they go over to the NATO side, because that's the logic of this situation. If they are claiming that Russia's invasion is legal, immoral, blah blah blah, they are taking the NATO line, and they are supporting actions against Russia, whether they think so or not. They're supporting NATO and U.S. imperialism against Russia.
That's a great answer, Chris. And I mean, I agree with that, and those are the same things that I tell the people.
Yeah, I think the U.S. Peace Council had a very good statement on that and said that same thing.
Well,
I was going to continue, if I may, about the class
Sure.
nature. The class nature. I was thrown at me this morning by somebody. Well, the class nature. First of all, in Ukraine itself, when the NATO-backed coup took place in Kiev in 2014, the immediate result of that was the banning of the Communist Party, which used to get 20 to 25% of the votes in Ukraine. It was very popular. And many of its leaders were arrested, some were murdered, buildings were seized, assets seized, and they were suppressed and had to go underground. Labor unions are broken. So the working class, since the Nazi-oriented regime in Kiev has taken power, has been suppressed. And by trying to get rid of the Nazis, I would think that would be to the benefit of the Ukrainian working class. As for the Russian working class, well, the Russian Communist Party and others think that it's a good thing because they are defending the Russian people, which includes the working class, against the U.S. imperialism. And for the world working class, how can the world working class flourish in a system dominated by U.S. hegemony, U.S. imperialism, NATO imperialism, and by supporting NATO imperialism by saying Russia is the bad guy here? If you can't break, if they're all very good, these people, at wringing their hands when some poor little country, hardly able to defend itself, is attacked by the United States or NATO. Iraq and Afghanistan, and even then they put up great fights, resistance fights, but they wring their hands about small countries being attacked. But when some bigger country is able to stand up and defend itself and say, back off, then suddenly they switch sides.
Yeah.
Which shows to me that these people are not really Marxists or communists. They're really like libertarians, or think they disguise themselves, or maybe honestly think, but that's not how they really are acting. They're acting like, pro-imperialists. What else can you say?
Yeah, liberals. They're liberals.
Liberals, yeah, liberals at best.
Well, and to talk about the Ukrainians themselves, with under the tutelage since 2014, and actually since 2004 of the West, they've become the poorest country in Europe.
Yes, that's right.
And there seems to be no acknowledgement of that among the Ukrainians themselves, at least the ones I talk to on occasion.
Yeah, well, maybe they can't. My wife is Ukrainian. She's very upset about what's happened in Ukraine, and she supports what Russia's doing. I know. See, in Canada, there are two Ukrainian groups: the pro-fascists and they're pro-communists. And the pro-communists support Russia. The fascists obviously support the Canadian imperialist government and its training of the Azov battalion. But I don't think we're getting the true story out of Ukraine. I mean, if you saw the Russian Communist Party posted a statement by a man named Tetekin, who is a Ukrainian member of the party, about what it is really like in Ukraine for the working class and what's happened to them in the last 10 years. And I think it's essential reading. It's a very passionate, powerful statement about why this action was necessary from the working class point of view in Ukraine, let alone world geopolitical aspects of it.
Yeah, the U.S., like you said, Carlo, they totally impoverished Ukraine, and Chris just mentioned how they just impoverished Russia in '89 when they took over there. It was an unmitigated disaster. So that's what the West does. They're not about developing economies or bringing prosperity. They're about looting and destroying, really. And Ukraine's being set up as a staging ground to, of course, do the same thing to Russia, to isolate, regime change, and balkanize Russia.
Right.
But that doesn't explain the gap between people's consciousness of it and the fact of it. And that for me is the mystery. And I need a guru here.
It's the PR machine. It's the propaganda apparatus. It is incredible.
Yeah, the propaganda here, I mean, in Canada is intense, and I flip on the television every night just to scan CNN and PBS and the CBC.
Oh, God.
See what they're saying, but it's almost, I can't even bear it now. It's just it's making me ill. But the propaganda is intense. Andrew Martinyov said it's grotesque, actually. You just watch his videos, but it is. It's as bad as when they attacked Yugoslavia in 1999 and bombed it intensively every day, hour by hour, every night and every day for 78 days, and killed tens of thousands of people. The propaganda was almost as intense then against Milosevic, against the Serbs. But this has gone over is really intense. I mean, we are really in a war, NATO against Russia, that's for sure. And it's getting dangerous because it's very difficult to express yourself openly here.
Well, to bring it back, I mean, to get a little far afield, an analogy of the propaganda is Major League Baseball, and the propaganda is they'll show Cuban children playing baseball, and they all have gloves and they have manicured fields, and this is under the most heinous distress, economic distress from the United States, and this is but they all have but they're well equipped, as though this were some sort of luxury that a country in their position can't afford. Then switch to the Dominican Republic, and they'll have children. They'll be bragging about how the children show the initiative because they take empty milk cartons and make gloves out of empty milk cartons, and how heroic that is. And then the American public it sucks it up as though, oh, isn't it wonderful? These Dominicans, so many of them become Major League Baseball players here in the U.S. and they have to, and when they're children, all they have are these milk cartons that have been converted into first base mitts and catcher's mitts. And yet in Cuba they waste money. They waste money on manicured fields and leather gloves, and it's like people here they don't get the utter stupidity of their position. It's like it's blank to them. The Lemming Project is in full swing, and in this situation, anyway, I'll leave it there. But anybody can jump in who wants to jump in.
Right. No, I think you're both right. The propaganda is intense and it's deliberately meant to convince the population to do what they otherwise wouldn't do. Most people don't want to kill anybody, but so to support a war, they have to convince people to hate people, and that's what they do, and they do it very well. And people are, because of all sorts of problems in their personal lives and working and not paying attention and believing that their country must be good in some way. So who would my sisters like? Why would they actually lie to us so openly? Well, they do. That's what they do. So people can't believe that these people, these talking heads, are willing to lie so absurd, so openly and so deeply, and get away with it. But that's what's happening. Jacques Ellul, a great, I think, French philosopher, writer, he had a book called On Propaganda, and he says that the bourgeoisie is and the middle class are the most easily propagandized because they think they have to have an opinion on everything. And the working class is less easily propagandized because they're too busy taking care of themselves to pay attention to what's going on. So you got a mixture of the two things. And then there's desperation. People are worried about money and the economy and COVID. I mean, people are distracted. So they get these news feeds on their TV and that must be the way it is.
Yeah, also people are pretty distant from the actual problems, and they don't see it face to face, and so it's like sort of easy to distract the person from that's not really acquainted with what's going on face to face. I mean, if you were seeing what was actually happening, if they were shown footage or given the actual information, I mean, it would be sort of, what fight would there be? I mean, it would be obvious.
Yeah.
And that's takes us back to what Chris said earlier about the fate of the Communist Party after the 2014 coup. Virtually no one I know who is for resisting Russia's invasion or liberation, if you will, knows that. They don't know that. They don't even know the simplest facts. They don't even know that there was a 2014 coup. They don't know that 2.5 million Russians, Russian speakers in the Donbass had fled Ukraine for Russia in the last 8 years because of the bombing of the Donbass. They don't know that 11,000 of them had been slaughtered by Ukrainian forces.
They know that's Putin propaganda, Carlo. That's what they know. They know you're just spouting Russian propaganda.
Yeah. Well, I have to say though, now they've thrown Pepe Escobar and Scott Ritter off of Twitter, and in a way, in a negative way, you can take solace out of that because obviously they were having some effect. The message was getting out there, and so they had to act, and that's the only solace I can get, because chipping away at it a little bit. But frankly, I mean, I don't want to get too personal here, but I've had two people that I felt very close to who will no longer talk to me. They shut out every fact I give them about it, which might bring us to they're done with me, and that might bring us to Aaron Mate and his. I don't know how Aaron Mate stands it. Here's a guy who spent so much time. He's a great journalist, a great researcher. taking apart Russiagate. He spent years doing that, and now he's doing these false flags one by one. And there comes a point where there are so many false flags that you just have to. You can almost at face value, and I will do this on occasion. Go Buka, false flag. I don't need to spend a whole lot of time on the evidence. I don't need to waste another 2 weeks looking at this side of it and that side of it, right, just to find out that it originated out of the Central Intelligence Agency, or this remark about Mariupol originated with some young woman who used to work with John Kerry. Yeah. We're going to go back to the Iraq, the Contra days, but she, like she did, because for me, the point where I began misbelieving, when I began understanding that they were lying to me, was the sadism of the 50s, where they told every 5, 6, 7-year-olds that they could be incinerated anytime with this nuclear bomb. How sadistic is that? Especially when that was a lie. When Robert Lovett and other people in the Truman administration and from the Roosevelt administration admitted, Robert Lovett being a Madison Avenue flack, admitted that if we can sell the American public on this notion of a Soviet threat, we can sell them anything. That's a paraphrase of exactly what he said. That kind of sadism, at that level, I think it's just incomprehensible for the normal human being out there. I have no other answer for it. And then the Gulf of Tonkin, and on and on and on and on. The revelations of the Church and Pike committees. Oh my God! And it just goes on, lie. 100 journalists working at the Washington Post. It was revealed that the Church committee revealed, the Pike committee revealed, were actually either CIA assets or CIA personnel. And now it's worse because you have Jeff Bezos, who has a huge contract with the CIA. And you go, how much does it take to wake some people up? Now, I have to say, I had some falling out with some of my colleagues, and I said that, well, the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos has a contract with the Central Intelligence Agency, this woman goes, oh, I didn't know Jeff Bezos owned the Washington Post. So, oh fuck. And then another argument I had. I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox now, but I'll get off in a minute. But I go, well, don't you realize that the Russians cannot be Nazis because the Nazis killed 27 million Russians in the Great Patriotic War? Yep. She looked at me like, Carlo, why would you say such a thing? That, how could you make up such a terrible lie?
Oh my God.
And what's the Great Patriotic War? So, oh my God.
Wow.
It's so frustrating in that regard. That's how good the propaganda machine is. Yeah. That's how sadistic my language can get bad very quickly. That's how sadistic these people are. How do you crack that?
Well, it was interesting you raised the Washington Post because I think it was 2 summers ago. There was a famous story. I did an article on this about the Washington Post put out, obviously as a conduit from the CIA and other intelligence agencies in the U.S., that a list of 200 independent journals, which they said were pro-Russian and pro-Chinese, and that they would be eliminated or should be suppressed. And I took it then as a warning to those journals, and a lot of them have been since suppressed. Counterpunch, well, you name it, I can't go off the list, but there was a lot of the ones and used to see on Facebook and Twitter are now banned. And they proceeded to do that.
You're referring to that blacklist from that one organization. This was like right around the time of Trump.
That's right. Yeah.
It's interesting that that blacklist had actual Ukrainian roots to it. Did you ever see? There was an investigative article about that shadowy company, and they came up with this blacklist of journalists, and then that list just ended up on all the major newspapers.
That's right.
So,
It came up. It was a CIA-backed group, but based in Latvia and Ukraine and places like Poland. Yeah. So this has been planned for some time, but that's what I guess. This is all intimidation kicking off. Escobar and Ritter and many other people is to intimidate the population.
Right.
If we can keep these guys off, what can we do to you? So.
Yeah, and as there's more of a crisis, more of a global crisis, as the West sees itself more and more under threat, they're going to be less and less tolerant of allowing people to be platformed on social media, and as people, have a voice and are being listened to, those people are going to be taken off. So, we're happy we still have Gray Zone, and I don't know if there's another outlet that is as popular and doing such solid work, regular solid work. But I mean, there's not very many anymore. There used to be a lot. You guys would list off the authors that were being published and telling the truth. But these days, there's less and less.
Whereas Consortium News does some good things. They had some good pieces by Diana Johnston and people like that.
Yep.
Yeah, Mint Press.
Yeah,
and I also find South Front to be very useful.
Right.
And others, but it's good to advertise them anywhere we can.
Yeah, there was a very good report by a Swiss military analyst, Jack Baud, B-A-U-D. I can send you the link later. It's put out April 12th, but he analyzes the Russian military operation in Ukraine and pretty much establishes that Russia had to act because of the offensive they were planning against the Donbass and other general threats against Russia from NATO. And that the military operation is the Russians are winning it hands down, and everything they're doing is what they plan to do. What the future will be, we don't know. But so there are some things out there, but they're more and more difficult to find.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can shift course a little bit here, because I had something I wanted to ask you, Chris. Like I said earlier, I watched your speech before the World Public Forum in 2014, where you elaborated in some detail, or at least you had a litany of intimidation launched against you for defending. I really don't want to try to. Well, maybe I can. The Rwandan general, Augustin Diliamana.
Yeah, you got.
I'm sorry. Yeah, could you? And at the end, you said you had more on that list. Could you, for the audience, elaborate on what you're talking about there?
Yeah, well, it's not the first. My experiences with NATO and the CIA and things like that began around 2000. But before that, I'm a criminal lawyer, so I've had intimidation from police from time to time. I used to work for a black lawyer, Charles Roach, is very famous in Toronto, a civil rights lawyer, and I did a case for him once, and the police detectives approached me and told me to drop the case, or they were going to deal with me because they didn't want me working with a black lawyer. So they physically threatened me, and then they tried to stitch me up with smuggling cocaine into prisons and trying to throw me in jail, the RCMP. There's a lot of dirty things go on in the criminal world, in the criminal legal world. But I was a bit surprised by when I got involved with the Rwandan case in 2000. When I first went to Tanzania, where the tribunal was based, my experiences began then. I'm hearing a bit of feedback on
might be the one side.
Anyway, the feedback. It began almost immediately when I first went down to defend this General Diliamana, who is the chief of staff of the Rwandan National Police, or the Gendarmerie. I was asked to be interviewed by somebody contacted me and asked if they would if I could be interviewed by them, and it turned out it was an American Army major, intelligence officer, and he was accompanied by an intelligence officer from the U.S. State Department Research Intelligence Bureau, and they spent 2 hours grilling me, asking me what my general wants to do, what I was doing, what our plans were, why we were going to do this, what we were going to say about their involvement in Rwanda, blah, blah, blah. It was quite clear they were very friendly, but their message was quite clear. You better lay low and not do too much to disturb us. Then I had several incidents where I went to dinner once with about 15 other lawyers, went to a Chinese restaurant in the town we were in, and we all ate from the same shared plates, and I got severe food poisoning, ended up in the hospital, and the doctors told me that somebody had deliberately poisoned me. Nobody else at the dinner got sick, only me. And they think one of the cooks put something in the soup, and it almost killed me. They said they'd never seen such a level of poison in somebody. And then I found out that the Tanzanian secret police were following me and tried to attach people to my side and tail me and then find out information. And then they planted several agents inside my legal team. I was allowed to have a co-counsel and a legal assistant, a couple of investigators. Several of them I ended up with turned out to be working either for the Americans or the Belgians, who were heavily involved with helping the Americans in that situation. And we had to get rid of them. And they were putting out false information. They were sabotaging our investigations. They were revealing things to the prosecution, what we were doing. And I was interviewed several times by the Tanzanian secret police, and one guy became very friendly with me, but he told me, there's a big discussion among us about what to do with you. That one side wants to kill you. The other side thinks you're deep cover or CIA, so they're not sure what to do with you. Nobody's quite clear who you are. I said, anyway, so that's how absurd it became. And in 2008, I was in a bar one Saturday night having a drink, and this fellow sat down. I knew him from the administration. There's about 1,000 people working at that tribunal, and he was a Japanese American. And he sat down, and he had a big role there. But he proceeded to tell me that his history, and that he was a major in the U.S. Army intelligence in Iraq, in the war in Iraq, and that he was involved in the assassination of Milosevic and the assassination of Yasser Arafat, and what the poisons they used. And I asked him, why are you telling me all this? And then he had been transferred from the Army to New York, the UN headquarters, as a civilian, undercover civilian, but then he joined also the CIA and he was sent here to be on, his cover was to be an administrator, but his job is to oversee things. I said, so why are you telling me all this? And he said, because I want you to know who I am when I tell you what I'm going to tell you. I said, what are you going to tell me? He said, if you don't back off what you're doing, we're going to kill you. At that point, I just got up and I walked away. I said, well, you can go fuck yourself, basically. And I got up and walked away. And as I walked away, a very senior security man walked up to me and he said, well, what are you talking to that CIA man for? I said, so he is CIA. He said, oh, yeah. I said, well, he just sat down. He's telling me, he says, you be careful of that guy. So anyway, I reported it to the judges in the court the next morning. I put it on record because I decided to, best protection is to make it public. And of course, I was mocked. They said I was being dramatic, a drama queen. I was trying to invent things and to get attention and so on and so forth. And they wouldn't offer me any protection. My client, when I told him, he just said, well, look, if they wanted you dead, you'd be dead already. That's what they do. So they're just trying to intimidate you. I said, well, they're doing a good job. He said, well, you want to continue or not? I said, yeah, let's continue. So we carried on. And then in 2009, I discovered a letter written by Paul Kagame to some people, which proved that the allegations about what happened in Rwanda were false. And I published that in Monthly Review, actually. And I revealed that in court. And that evening, I went to some restaurant. I was tailed by Tanzanian secret police. Some of the owners of the restaurant came over to me and told me that this man's tailing you. He's secret police. I reported that, and then that stopped. But again, they told me, they contacted me and told me that people had plans for me. In 2014, I was contacted by the Canadian Secret Intelligence Service, CSIS. They called me up and asked to talk with me, and I said about what? They said about Rwanda. So I met them at a cafe, and a young woman and a middle-aged man, and they told me, the Rwandan government wants to murder you. I said, yeah, I'm aware of that. I've been aware of that for a long time. Well, your name's on this list, and they showed me this list. My name was on this list. I said, well, I was sort of aware of that, but you got any more information? He said, well, now we're aware they want to kill you in Canada. I said, well, that's new. I said, so what are you going to do to protect me? And they said, we're not going to do anything to protect you. So I said, well, what's the point of telling me all this? Well, maybe if you want to be safer, you should be more quiet. Then you might be safe. And that's the way the conversation ended. So I took it then that was a warning, a threat. And then a few months later, it came out that the Rwandan government actually sent a 4-man hit team to Montreal to kill me, Judy Rivera, journalist here, and 2 Rwandan opposition leaders who were based here in Toronto and Montreal. And we reported that to CSIS, and they didn't do too much about it, but the press got hold of it. It became a big story in the press here. And the same team had been in London, which was thrown out by the Scotland Yard and British government because they planned to kill some people in London as well, but they were kicked out. So I'm not sure what happened to that, but I'm still here, so I guess nothing really happened. And when I was working for Milosevic, going in The Hague, I worked with several lawyers. We were always followed. I was interviewed by at least 4 or 5 people I found out worked for the CIA, disguised as journalists or investigators or researchers, trying to find out information and intimidate you. So it's rife. And then when I first few months at the tribunal, 2 Irish lawyers told me that our phones are tapped, they were followed. Other lawyers told me the same thing. And there was a Scottish lawyer named Andrew McCartan who had a client there. And he was accused of some financial irregularity and kicked out. But before he did, he came to see me in Toronto and said he had information of how deeply the United States was involved in what happened in Rwanda, and he was going to blow it wide open. And I said, well, and he said, and he was shaking. He said, I'm very nervous because I just tried to see Bill Clinton in New York. I was thrown out of his office. I was going to ask him questions about this. And when I get back to Scotland, I'm going to send you these documents, but I have to tell you what's going on. And I said, well, this is fascinating. So 2 weeks later, he was dead. His car went off a cliff in Scotland, and there was no sign of drinking or skid marks or any other vehicle involved. He just went off a cliff. And that was the end of that. So I never got the documents, but I think he was probably killed. This is the type of thing that goes on in these tribunals. There's all sorts of other ways of harassing you, and they try to, they refused to pay me actually for my 3rd year there. They phoned me and said, we're not going to pay you anymore. You've done too much work. And I said, well, you approved all my bills as reasonable so far, because you had to, every bill that you sent in, they gave you so many hours per month, and then they would cut that down by 1/3 automatically, and then they would still cut it further, so you're making next to nothing. But anyway, the bills that were finally approved were considered reasonable. And then 3 years after that, they said, well, we're not going to pay you. We paid you too much. Actually, we're going to claw back from future payments all the money we gave you. So they were trying to drive me out of the tribunal, and they refused to give me the co-counsel I wanted. They did all sorts of things. I saw letters from the Belgian government to my client that he obtained from the foreign ministry saying that we have to get rid of Black under any circumstances. He's causing too much trouble. And And it wasn't just about me. It was about the fact that the man I was representing was a very important figure who once was considered to be president of Rwanda, was going to be possible president of Rwanda.
Can we take a break, Chris, and then
sure,
we'll get
take a break,
context?
Yes.
Because I want to get that context about why all these things are taking place. So, but I'm pretty sure Dustin needs to take us to break.
Right.
Let's take a brief break. You're watching the Foreign Policy Review. I'm Dustin Pickering. Brief break. Only
or
brief.
not.
Only brief. Only brief. Okay. Let me. Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely finish you. Hey, sports fans! New York Parrot has come out with a great new show for you guys, Sports with Rich. Broadcast time 10 p.m. Tuesday evening. Rich Mancuso with Robert Rizzo as a co-host. Sports with Rich is captivating, informative, and entertaining, and it will pertain to all American sports such as soccer, football, basketball, baseball, athletics, wrestling, you name it. Get rich information from Rich Mancuso on Sports with Rich. Parrot TV, the voice for humanity. Welcome back to the Foreign Policy Review. I'm Dustin Pickering, and we have Chris Black today, again, as from last week. Billy Bob, did you want to ask a specific question?
Yeah. So I'm just, I'd like Chris to explain better the context within which all this kind of influence and pressure is taking place. So you're, in the Rwanda case, you are defending. You said the chief of staff of the gendarmerie, and
right.
So he was accused of all kinds of things, and this is all kind of pillars of the Western narrative. So
right.
you're kind of collapsing their Western narrative with your advocacy, and you're kind of becoming a problem, right? I mean, could you explain that a little bit?
Right. So yeah, if many people compared the so-called genocide in Rwanda with the Nazi genocide against the Jews and so on. Well, if you use that analogy, then the client I was representing, the general I was representing, was the head of the Gestapo, and he was charged with about 45 counts of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and so on. And it was quite clear from the get-go that all the charges were fabricated, every one of them. But when I can tell, it's a long story how I got involved in that case, but essentially the narrative is completely the opposite of what actually happened. It was another imperialist war to crush a semi-socialist country, a small country, overthrow its government, install basically a dictatorship of Kagame, who then they used to invade Congo to seize the resources of the Congo, which is what they've been doing for the last 25, 30 years. So the tribunal, like the Hague tribe, the Yugoslav tribunal in The Hague, because they're sister tribunals, they had the same prosecutor, Louise Goldstone, then Arbor, then Del Ponte, and then who's the guy now, a German fellow. Their whole reason d'etre, the reason to be, was to put out a false narrative by making up false accusations against these selected accused, and to propagate this through these trials that were actually just outright show trials, and to cover up what the West really did. and to condemn as criminals, common criminals, leaders of states that they've attacked and destroyed. So, up in the old Roman days and the old days when you had a war with a country and you defeated the ruler, you would treat with that ruler and come to some agreement about political terms. Now the United States has taken this new tack of making their enemies into common criminals. So now Biden is accused Putin of genocide and things like this, like the same they did with China, the same they did with Milosevic. This charge riles people up, gets some other emotions going. So they're no longer national leaders, they're just common criminals who happen to be in charge of a government. And that's what these tribunals are for. So the narrative in Rwanda, we've all heard about all the Tutsis being massacred by the Hutus, and nobody knows why. Turns out it's the exact opposite. And the proof in the pudding that we proved in that case what happened, not what they say happened, was that General Ndiliamana was acquitted on all counts. And in the judgment, the judges inserted a paragraph stating that Mr. Black claimed all along that the charges against his client were political, and we agree with him. Were politically motivated, and we agree with him. And the judge told me later, I got a message through from the senior judge, who was in charge of my case, after the fact, from an assistant, that the Americans, the CIA in the tribunal, had threatened him that if he didn't take that paragraph out, they were going to do something to him, but he insisted on putting it in. So this is how they work. So the gendarmerie was accused of all sorts of massacres, but in fact, it turns out that the evidence is, from overwhelming evidence, the gendarmerie tried to protect people wherever they could. And it was the invading RPF, Rwandan Patriotic Forces under Kagame from Uganda, supported by the Americans and British and Canadians and Belgians, who did most of the massacres, and still do today. And so the West supports this dictator. I mean, Kagame is responsible with his Western allies of killing millions of people, maybe 6 or 7 million people, maybe 10 million people in Rwanda and Congo in the last 20 years. And he's left in power because it suits them. And the same with Yugoslavia, the same thing in the loss. But we can go on into that. Anyway, so we get into the prosecutors and why the prosecutors are the way they are. And one of the other things that was a big scandal at the Rwanda tribunals when Louise Arbour, who is prosecutor for the ICTY and laid the charges with Madeleine Albright against Milosevic in the Hague tribunal, she was also the prosecutor of the Rwanda tribunal. She launched an investigation to the shoot down of the presidential plane, which was shot down April 6, 1994, which they say started this genocide. Because the plane was shot down, president was killed, Army Chief of Staff was killed, as a decapitation strike, and then they launched their offensive. So everybody knew that whoever shot down that plane is responsible for what happened. So it turns out it was the RPF with the CIA help and Canadian help, Belgian help. But she launched an investigation, and she hired an Australian lawyer, Michael Hurrigan, who was part of their prosecution team, to do the investigation. And lo and behold, he came back to her a few months later and said, we've got all the documents to prove it was the RPF, with the help of the CIA and others, who shot down the plane. And there was a phone call that took place with an FBI guy named Jim Lyons, who was an assistant to Arbour, confirmed that Hurrigan phoned her in The Hague and told her this. She asked him to come to The Hague with the document. He put it on a disc. It's the only disc he had. He was told to keep it only on one disc. He went to The Hague to meet her, and he was all excited that he'd found out who had shot down the plane, and they were going to prosecute these people. And he was then went into her office and was told to hand over the disc, and then was told that the investigation was shut down. So and on that plane, like 25 people were killed on that plane. So Louise Arbour took part in covering up the murder of about 20 to 25 people, and covering up who was responsible for the incident, which actually started in 1994 events, because the war had been going on for 4 years before that. And Michael Hurrigan then wrote a report to the Office of Internal Oversight in the UN, reporting this event and what had happened to him, and that these things, there are dark forces inside the UN and the tribunal trying to cover up the real truth of history. and he was then was forced to resign, and he died of cancer a couple of years ago, sadly. But he was a great, courageous man, and he filed an affidavit in several trials in the Rwanda tribunal, stating, and his affidavit was filed stating this is what had happened, and that these are the ones that did it, and Louise Arbour, and then Del Ponte continued that policy of covering up this massacre, as she did with the same thing in the ICTY. So both Louise Arbour was a professor of mine at law school, and she's quite well known here. She was very famous, and we first met her again after law school when the attack on Yugoslavia took place. David Jacobs, a very well-known counsel here, labor counsel and criminal lawyer, and John Philpott of Montreal and some others, and I decided to file war crimes charges against NATO for the attack on Yugoslavia. And Michael Mandel, who was a professor at my law school, Osgoode Hall, where she used to work, went to see her in The Hague and handed over the documents and all the evidence we had that that's what was happening, and asked her to lay war crimes charges against all the NATO leaders and officers. And they got a very cold, frosty reception, were told to get out. So she is obviously an asset for Western intelligence agencies. And then she left the prosecution's office. She was rewarded by being made a Supreme Court judge in Canada. And then she went from there, surprisingly, to the International Crisis Group, which is also a CIA-backed analytical group trying to influence foreign policy for the United States.
It's interesting, Chris, that they have limitations, right? Like the imperialists, they have limitations, but they have incredible power. Like they can convince all the Western speaking world of a certain narrative, but they can't get a judge in place to confirm it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, the judges, we had a hard time because for the first 3 years or so, the judges were very hostile. There were 4 accused in this trial: the Army Chief of Staff, the National Police Chief of Staff, and 2 other officers of other units. And the judges were extremely hostile to us. They wouldn't let us cross-examine. They tried to browbeat us, and we just fought back because I was used to that I was not used to that sort of intimidation in a court before. I've had some right-wing judges and hard judges, but nothing like these people. But so it just made us angry. So we fought back, and we had shouting. I've never done this in court before. We had shouting matches, but over time, we began to convince them with so much evidence, and the prosecution documents and the witnesses became so absurd, and even the judges began to see that they were being manipulated and used. One of the judges, a Ukrainian judge, Ostrovsky, voted to acquit an important fellow, and he gave an interview to the press in Ukraine that everything they'd been told about Rwanda was a lie. He said that the prosecution lied to us from start to finish. Nothing they said happened the way it did. And he was then dismissed as a judge. He was not allowed back in. And that happened to a couple of them. Most of them seemed to do whatever the West wanted them to do, but there were some judges who finally came around, and they didn't like being manipulated and lied to.
So your client was ultimately acquitted, right? Your client?
Yeah, he was acquitted on all counts. He was acquitted first on most counts in 2011, and they appealed, and they tried to stitch him up. There was 2 counts remaining, and I appealed those, and then they tried to appeal all the acquittals. And in 2014, he was found not guilty on everything. And but then it took 2 years before he could get back to Belgium. So.
But I mean, justice eventually won out, thankfully. And I'm just saying, like, that's incredible that they allow even that small bit of justice, because you'd think they could just, pressure the judges or put judges in place that are going to just do a rubber stamp the guilty.
Yeah.
But his acquittal basically undermined the entire narrative, right? I mean, it undermined.
Right. You've undermined the entire, because if you assume that narrative was true, you cannot imagine how the chief of the National Police could be acquitted.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't make sense. And in fact, Alison DeForge, you may be aware of, who is the important American expert witness in all these trials. She's an expert on Rwanda and so on, and had written a book, Leave None to Tell the Tale, very famous. she switched her opinion in 2005 in our trial. She testified that for the prosecution, when she was asked, so what was the plan by the government to commit genocide? She said, in my opinion now, the government did not have any plan to commit genocide. And it's an impossibility because the government was composed of Tutsis and Hutus. It wasn't a Hutu government. It was a mixed government. And Tutsis controlled several major cabinet ministries. So.
Wasn't the objective of bringing the general to trial to get him to basically snitch on other people?
Yes, it was. He was first brought down under a ruse. They didn't tell him he was going to be arrested. They wanted to interview him. They wanted him to testify against Colonel Bagosora, who was their big fish, they said. And he wasn't really that involved. I mean, he was a deputy defense minister. He didn't really have a big role. But they needed a big fish, so they dressed him up as this big fish, as this monster. And he didn't really do much of anything. Even if you accept the allegations, he didn't really do too much. And then the dealing man was required to testify against him. And they spent 4 years trying to pressure him, asking me to get him to talk, and then they would let him go. And we refused. We just said, he said he was always willing to talk to them, but only as a free man, not under pressure as being a prisoner.
Well, I admire your courage under that kind of intimidation. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, in fact, all the statements of witnesses in our trial were written after his arrest, not before. So they concocted a case after his arrest.
I know we don't have much time left, but I wanted to ask you about a comment you made last time about 911 and being in a bar with a bunch of other with an international group of people, and they didn't hesitate to say that the U.S. did it did 911 to themselves.
Right.
Just go with that. And
well, it just didn't make sense right from the get-go. As soon as we saw that, and when I came back, I had some friends in America, United States, were on the phone, and it's quite clear this is what happened. This claim that some Arabs, why would Bin Laden do it? I mean, Bin Laden's been working for the American army for years. He's an ally. Why would he suddenly attack the hand that feeds him and pays him?
Yeah, he was in Kosovo, right? I mean,
yeah, he was. When it happened, I spoke to President Milosevic, went to visit him, and I said, "What do you think of 9/11?" He said, "It's just absurd what they're saying." He said, "They had to have done it themselves because Bin Laden was working under American Army command in Kosovo. Our intelligence services detected him there with the jihadis working for them, trying to kill our people in 1998 and as late as 1999." So how come a few months later he's suddenly attacking New York? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And then, of course, when they closed the airspace in the United States for 3 days, the only 2 or 3 planes allowed out belonged to the Bin Laden family. Well, wouldn't you want to keep those people to interrogate where is their son? Of course, but Bin Laden family is partners with Bush and Halliburton, and they still are probably. Very interesting connection. But then, and then the whole way it happened, and then the investigations afterwards about, and then of course some of these Arabs turn up alive in different countries in the Middle East and they're not dead. And the BBC revealed that 3 of them on the plane were not in the plane. And then you had the third building, number 7, which was dynamited. I mean, blown up, obviously. So it must have been wired beforehand. So you must assume that the other ones were wired beforehand.
Building number 7.
There's so many legitimate reasons to be suspicious, but there's obviously that's just off limits, right? If you take that view, you're outside of the mainstream. You're a conspiracy theorist. Jim Garrison made an interesting point about after Kennedy was killed within hours, the government was assuring everybody it was a lone gunman, and meanwhile the investigation was just getting underway. They had no idea what was going on, but the government was saying it's a lone gunman, nothing to see here, move on. And it was the same thing with 9/11. So Bin Laden, within hours, it was Bin Laden, and they haven't even begun the investigation. But it's nonsensical. But and there's been lots of investigations by all sorts of people, I think, establishing that
whatever happened, the narrative that they put out is not correct.
Totally.
And if you ask who benefits, obviously it was used quite quickly as the pretext to invade first Afghanistan and then Iraq and so on.
Well, thanks, guys, for joining today. And we're going to close the show. And this is Foreign Policy Review. We had Chris Black today. Go back and watch the show. Subscribe to our channel if you're watching right now. And go back and watch some other of our shows on Parrot TV. So thank you very much for watching today, viewers. And have an excellent day. Do some research and writing and reading. Have a great day. Dustin Pickering here.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you for being a guest again,
very
Chris.
much.
And Billy Bob as well. Hey, sports fans! New York Parrot has come out with a great new show for you guys, Sports with Rich. Broadcast time 10 p.m. Tuesday evening. Rich Mancuso with Robert Rizzo as a co-host. Sports with Rich is captivating, informative, and entertaining, and it will pertain to all American sports such as soccer, football, basketball, baseball, athletics, wrestling, you name it. Get rich information from Rich Mancuso on Sports with Rich. Parrot TV, the voice for